Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So we are from group 3, and as for today we are going to be presenting to you guys about ethical egoism. So my name is Ridzuan and I am the first presenter, and the second presenter will be Sharifah and Aishah, and last but not least Nurul Arifah will be the third presenter. So what is ethical egoism? So ethical egoism, according to McKinnon and Fiala in 2015, can be defined as a theory about what we ought to do and how we ought to act. So ethical egoism is a normative theory. So you might be wondering what a normative theory is. So normative theory defines good decisions as ones that are most likely to provide the decision maker with desired outcomes, according to Edwards in 1954 and Yates in 1990. When we talk about ethical egoism, there are two types of ethical egoism. The first one would be individual ethical egoism, and the second one would be universal ethical egoism. The first ethical egoism, individual ethical egoism, you can put it as I ought to look out only for my own interest. And to explain more, we, or in this context, our own self, will only concern about others to the extent that this concern also contributes to my own interest, to our own interest. Meaning we will not pay attention to others except what they do will contribute to our self. And the second would be universal ethical egoism. Universal is polar opposite to individual ethical egoism, which means if individual ethical egoism is about a person, and universal ethical egoism will be about people as a whole. So people ought to look out for and seek only their own best interest, and people ought to help others only when and to the extent that it is their own best interest to do so. Meaning we will help others the way that we want others to help us too. So in other words, we could say it as what you give, you get back. Next is the common goal of ethical egoism. So the common goal of ethical egoism, Adam Smith, which he is the godfather of capitalism, said that common goal is best promoted when people focus on their own private good. So when people pursue their own self-interest, and unintended consequence is that everyone is better off. Meaning when we pursue our self-interest, that thing might not give benefit to others. So it is best if we keep it to ourselves, and others will not get affected by our self-interest. So this is a situation. I will give you a situation. There are two men, man A and man B. So man A tries so hard to make man B happy. So man B is not happy, and so is man A. What man A thinks will make man B happy is not true. So therefore, it can be deduced that we can only be happy if we concentrate on making ourselves happy, and because only we know what is best for us and not others, and we should also leave others to make themselves feel happy because they know what is best for themselves. So based on the statement that I have given, or the argument that has been given before, there are a few conflicts that come with the argument. The first conflict would be the argument is on a false dichotomy, because it serves only two choices, whether you focus on your own self-interest or others' self-interest, when actually we can do both by making both parties feel happy, that bring great benefits to both sides. The second conflict would be the justification is opposed with moral egoism. So the good of others should not be considered when we are determining what to do and what not to do in our life, because we are talking about our life now and not about other people's life. So as a matter of fact, we should think what is good for us, not others, when considering an option. The third conflict would be we can choose to pursue our self-interest, and most of the time while still protecting others' interests. This means sometimes we can do one, or we can do what we want for ourselves, and sometimes we can do the other, which means we can help or serve others' self-interest, while sometimes we can do both, meaning we can satisfy both sides, or our self-interest and other people's self-interest. And last but not least would be conflict. Number 4. So the argument ignore the different ways of people doing things that will make them happy. And we need to keep in mind that there are some people who are happy when they are harming others. Not all people view happiness just like how we view our happiness. Like, we might view happiness as when we get to eat an ice cream or something like that. But other people, they might view happiness as when they harm others. They feel happy when they are harming others. So, therefore, we should not make ourselves happy in ways that could imply harm to others by killing or hitting and everything that falls under that category. And pursuing harmful self-interest while ignoring its effects on others will not maximize our happiness. Meaning, if we decided to hit someone or kill someone or murder someone, it will not bring us happiness, because in the long run, it will get back to us too.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Sharifah Nur Aishah, and my matric number is 1824068. And I will continue the presentation with subtopic universality and social harmony in ethical egoism. So, universality is often said to be universal and applied to everyone. A philosopher said that everyone should do what is in his own interest. An egoistic principle is universal if it addresses itself to any person, and which means it is morally accepted for you to do what is in your self-interest regardless of its effects on others. And it is also acceptable for others to do what is in their self-interest regardless of its effects on you. So for the example, when a person robs a bank, he has done nothing wrong because it is his own self-interest towards money. He wants the money. It doesn't affect you physically or mentally. And another simple example is imagine you as a current Malaysian politician. You know what I'm saying, right? So you just have to imagine that you have self-interest towards your career, money, and poverty only, and you don't even think about the people or nation under you that may be affected by your action. As what I mentioned earlier, just imagine, and it doesn't have any relation with current issue. And the next, I will continue with second point is social harmony in ethical egoism. Majority of people thought that self-interest views is inconsistent because morality's functions is to resolve conflicts between people to live in harmony peacefully. And philosopher named Thomas Hobbes views egoism as a first principle for society, and he also said that survive and let survive as much as resources permit. And people are required to sacrifice their own self-interest to benefit and protect others. If everyone does whatever based on his or her self-interest only, regardless of how it will affect the society, people cannot live together and reach the harmony between them. For example, if everyone always stole, lied to each other, broke promises, and assaulted people to fulfill their own self-interest, the society cannot survive, as what Thomas Hobbes mentioned earlier. So that's why majority of people claim that ethical egoism in society or morality is required to follow the goods for society rather than follow their own private good to fulfill their own self-interest. That's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Arifah and I would like to present to you about short-term self-interest and long-term self-interest in ethical egoism. I'm sure that all of you have heard about short-term memory and long-term memory. So now we will take a look at short-term self-interest and long-term self-interest in ethical egoism. Now we move on to the meaning of short-term self-interest and also long-term self-interest. Okay, short-term self-interest means a temporary, immediate, and also an impermanent desire or want from a person. It means that maybe he or she wants to have something in a short period of time. So it will be called as short-term self-interest. And then for long-term self-interest, it refers to extended, long-lasting, and long-lived want or desire of or vision of an individual. It means that maybe in another 4 years, in another 5 years, in another 10 years, a person wants to achieve something in his or her life. So it will be called as long-term self-interest. One thing that we need to remember when it comes to short-term or long-term self-interest, we need to remember that what may be in a person's short-term self-interest might not be in his or her long-term self-interest. This means that maybe in a person's self-interest between short-term and long-term, there will be no similarity at all. It will be different and totally different from each other. Okay, for example, short-term and long-term situation. Okay, if a person love to steal something from others, so in short-term, she will not be caught and she will get many belongings of her friends and she will get money from it. But in a long term, she maybe will keep on stealing and will get caught at the end of the day. So we can differentiate between short term and long term. Okay, another example is about smoking. If a person is smoking, he will get satisfaction and feeling good when he is smoking if he only think about short-term self-interest. But if he think about long-term self-interest, if he continue to smoke, then he will get serious health problems. So we are going to discuss this from ethical egoism perspective. We need to look how ethical egoists look into these matters. Look into short-term self-interest and also long-term self-interest. Okay, ethical egoists believe that long-term self-interest takes priority over short-term interest because they believe that those who pursue their long-term self-interest would not ignore other self-interest and well-being. It means that if a person keeps on thinking about their importance or their well-being in the future with a long-term self-interest, they would eventually think about others' well-being and others' interests too. Using the example that I have given you just now to prove that a long-term self-interest takes priority over short-term self-interest, I use the same example, which is stealing. Okay, if a person loves to steal belonging and money from others, their short-term self-interest would be they do not want to get caught and they want their belongings and money easily. But their long-term self-interest will be they do not want to be jailed or live in prison, and they do not want others to know their behavior in the past, which is love to steal belonging and money from others. So when we say that long-term self-interest takes priority over short-term self-interest, is because if we consider these both interests, we would see that it is more important for someone to prioritize their long-term self-interest, because long-term self-interest is about our future and it will benefit others along the way. Okay, we would see here if the person prioritizes their long-term self-interest, he or she might not steal from others, so others will not get hurt. In addition to what I have explained just now, we will look into philosopher's view. One of the philosophers, a British philosopher, Joseph Butler, he said that people are happier if they care about others, do not harm anyone, and try to benefit others. It means that it shows that we have to prioritize our long-term self-interest because it will benefit others, and benefit others will make us be happier. In ethical egoism, there are two questions that people will always ask and critics towards this view and theory. So there are first, why must long-term self-interest take priority over short-term self-interest? And second one is, what if a person's long-term self-interest is to ignore others' well-being? So, the answer that I got from a book, which is from Makan and Fiola, which is entitled Moral Philosophy, Theories and Issue, it stated that regardless anything, it is not morally acceptable for a person to prioritize their short-term self-interest rather than others' well-being. But it will be morally acceptable if someone prioritize their long-term self-interest rather than others' interest and well-being. So we need to understand that the first priority would be long-term self-interest. Second is others' priorities and others' interests. And third one would be short-term self-interest. I would like to provide you an example of issue before we end our presentation related to ethical egoism. So first, there is a man named David Cash and his friend Jeremy Strameyer. Both of them were involved in a murder case when they were 18 years old. Okay, in this case, Jeremy raped and murdered a girl, 7-year-old girl. Meanwhile, David Cash just saw that crime happening and he did not do anything to help that girl or to stop his friend from doing that crime or to do any effort to help or report the case. He just ignored the scene and just go away from the place that he saw the crime is happening. So, if we think with our common sense, this case would say that Jeremy is guilty, of course, and David also guilty because he did not do anything to help that girl and to stop his friend from doing any crime. But as we are discussing about ethical egoism, we would see that we have two opinions, which is first, he is morally wrong, and second, he is not morally wrong. Okay, if you look into perspective from Aristotle prioritized virtues, and he said that virtues are excellent of character. So, in his view, in Aristotle's view, it would say that David is guilty and morally wrong because he did not use his wisdom to protect that girl and to prevent his friend from doing any crime. But in the other hand, Ayn Rand, a writer that practice individualistic, would say that David Cash is not wrong because he is doing something to prioritize his own long-term self-interest. Because if we get into the problem and do the crime to save that girl, he might be charged with a charge that could eventually ruin his future. And now he did not charge with anything because he did not interfere during that time. So he is doing that because he prioritized his long-term self-interest. So that's all from us for this presentation. We hope that you understand about ethical egoism. So that's all from us. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.